There's a lot of arguments for and against the stock, but to help us flesh out these arguments just a little bit, I want to bring in Chris Kettenmann. He's an analyst at Miller Tabak, who has a buy on the stock, and then also Michel Di Capua. He is the head of U.S. research for Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Michel, I want to start with you and go a little bit big picture. The bankruptcy of Solyndra, that has clearly been a huge black mark on the industry. What does it mean for the future of solar?
The bankruptcy of Solyndra has an implication for U.S. solar manufacturing in particular. I mean, this was a company that was very much supported by, first of all, DOE loan guarantees, and then it was supported by this $500 million that came from the U.S. government. Now, with that vulnerability exposed, the fact that there was this issues with the Solyndra not kind of meeting with the targets it was supposed to meet, this, in a sense, kind of puts a lot of the solar manufacturing support from the U.S. government in question. At the same time, though, the U.S. government is ready to support solar in other ways. So it doesn't necessarily spell the end, doesn't necessarily spell a kind of a dramatic collapse for U.S. solar, but it does have implications for manufacturing.
Now, Chris, I want to bring you in to talk a little bit more specifically about First Solar. You have a buy on the stock. If you take a look at what the stock is doing today, it's falling. In fact, it's down about 5%. In fact, one of the analysts in the space cut its earnings rating on the stock and also the price target by about half. What makes you believe in the earnings picture for First Solar going forward?
The stock is the lowest cost producer in an extremely fast-growing industry. You know, going back to the Solyndra thing, I think that really means that there's really no place for high-cost producers in the space. And you're looking at the lowest cost producer here. They produce right now at about 75 cents per watt. The best-in-breed Chinese players are producing at about $1.15. And we think costs are only going to continue to fall. I think, the mid-60s are on the table for 2012 for the company. And, our $9 estimate for this year is, I think, really attainable. And they have a backlog of 2.6 gigawatts, which is a multi-billion-dollar number for execution in North America. So if you're looking for a name that's going to delever from EU exposure faster than anybody in the space, First Solar is your pick.
But in this environment where you've said there's been falling prices for solar panels, what advantage does being a low-cost provider actually give them anymore?
You have the highest margins in the space.
But if everyone's prices are falling, aren't everyone's margins going to be high, and isn't that eventually going to collapse?
Well, that's assuming the costs don't continue to come down. Also in the backlog, that 2.6 gigawatt AC backlog I pointed to earlier, that was actually contracted at pricing in 2008, 2009. When natural gas was, well above $8, $10 a BTU. So those prices are really more in the 15 cents to 16 cents per kilowatt hour. And their total installed cost product right now, you mentioned the utility systems, they can build those out for roughly 12 cents. So we think actually margins will expand once they start executing on that backlog.
One of the issues that have contributed to falling prices has been this imbalance between supply and demand. Michel, when do you think demand is actually going to catch up to the amount of supply that's in the industry?
It might take a while, Sheila. I mean, we're now in a situation where there's probably more equilibrium now than it will be in 2011 to 2014. There's so much Chinese manufacturing that's coming into play. This is very low-cost manufacturing. Demand is going to continue to ramp up, but at the same time, there's been so many plans put in place for module capacity, for the polysilicon capacity, which is upstream of that. So right now, while there might be a little tightness in polysilicon, for example, which is constraining some of the supply this year, next year will just expand much more significantly.
You mentioned fossil fuels. What kind of impact is fossil fuels going to have on the solar industry? When is solar actually going to catch up and be competitive to fossil fuels?
In many ways, it actually is in some parts of the world, Sheila. And if you look at when you're comparing solar, sometimes you want to compare it not to what's called the wholesale power price, but instead to the price that you actually pay in your house, the residential price. And in parts of the world like Turkey or Italy or Hawaii, we're already at a point that solar can be competitive with the other options. And so at that point, it becomes a question of consumer adoption.
Chris, one last quick question here. You talked a little bit about First solar plant construction. How big of an industry do you see that being, and how big of a project is that for First Solar?
I think First Solar is going to be able to continue to expand their backlog. Like I said, it's a 2.6. I think they'll be able to execute on projects this year and keep expanding. The California market still has legs to it. That's the desert Southwest in the U.S. is really where that backlog is concentrated. But we're looking for the Middle East to really pick up, China, and they're gaining very good traction in India as well.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Chris Kettenmann from Miller Tabak, Michel Di Capua from our own Bloomberg New Energy Finance Group.